So I think that video shows some really interesting areas from Daniel Goldman, one of the leading sort of people in respected people in emotional intelligence. He talked about it being about how we handle ourselves. He talked about there being 4 parts, but I thought it was interesting. He said about it was also about marshalling our positive emotions. So, not getting too excited, not just about the bad ones. He said we could learn it. He said it was about repeated experience, and we're going to talk more about reflection and how that comes on, but we need to practice it. He talked about the percentage of things it changes in education as well, but that can be transferred to the workplace, about productivity being increased, etc. And he mentioned the leaders who are sons of a bitches and how they're actually going against a lot of the time what the organisation is promoting in the sort of values and the culture. He talked about us becoming more emotionally intelligent, and he's not really a believer, so we're not really doing very well and we need to develop it, which is what we're talking about. Later bits, he talked about women being better than men at certain areas, and males do tend to struggle with empathy a lot of the time, and we'll talk about that. But he did say once people become leaders, there seems to be no difference. They're very equal, so we do learn it and we do develop it. Good bosses develop good emotional intelligence. So let's have a look at a couple of the key areas that Goldman talked about. Goldman focused on some key areas, the first being self-awareness, and I'm not going to talk about that in much detail now because that's what we're talking about overall. He then talked about self-regulating or self-management, and he said leaders who regulate themselves rarely launch into verbal attacks on others. They don't make rushed emotional decisions. They don't stereotype people, compromise their values. They regulate themselves. They stay under control. They have the flexibility and personal accountability to keep things under control. They know what their values are. They stick to them. They hold themselves accountable, and they don't go around blaming others. And they stay calm. It takes practice, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail. They show empathy. He talked about leaders having empathy, and it's critical if you're going to be successful in a team or an organization. You need to have empathy to put yourselves in the position of others' situation, and it helps you develop a team. You act fairly, you give constructive feedback, and you listen to the people who need it and talk to those who need it. You don't make assumptions or judge people on your own values or beliefs, because that's dangerous. If you want to earn the respect and loyalty of your team, to build that relationship, then you need to show you're caring for them by being empathetic. You need to have good social skills. It's all about building relationships. Leaders who do well have good social skills, and they're good communicators. They're good at hearing bad news and good news. They act in the right way. They know how to deal with certain people and other. For example, they know how to give an arm around the shoulder to some people, but not to others, because that might be uncomfortable for some people. They're good at managing change and resolving conflicts in a diplomatic way. And they rarely leave things and just ignore them. They tend to focus on getting things done, and working with people and setting an example by their own behavior. And finally, motivation. They're self-motivated and work towards goals. They don't need to be pushed all the time, and they have an extremely high standard which they like to bring their team along with them. So there's sort of areas that Goldman was talking about in his theory. There are many other theories, and we'll look at a couple in the next couple of slides. So, as I said, Goldman not the only person to have a theory around emotional intelligence. Another respected review is Salovey and Mayer, 1997, and they propose that we have a cognitive ability consisting of 4 different abilities, so mental skills that are part of general intelligence, and they said they were around perception, facilitation, understanding, and management of our emotions. So what were they talking about? Well, in the first one, they were talking about our ability to perceive, recognize our emotions, our self-emotions, and other people's emotions. And this includes the sort of non-verbal signals we're receiving, that is said in Mehrabian's rule to be 55% of what we're communicating. So they're obviously really important. It also includes such things as emotional stimulus, such as, I don't know, art, pictures, scenery, things that we see that bring back memories or stimulate things within us, and we need to be aware of those with people. They then talked about emotional facilitation, and they said there was 3 ways that it happens. First, the signaling of different emotions in important situations or environmental changes. So when we're in different situations, it signals different emotions. It also talked about our changing moods, and that can be due to the time of day, whether we're tired, how we feel, anything that's going on in our lives, and how that makes us look at things differently. And then they talked about the different types of reasoning. Some things we reason on emotions, some things we reason on fact. So how we facilitate those things can make a massive difference. They then talked about understanding our emotions and having knowledge of them. We looked at 4 types, just the basics: angry, happy, sad and scared. And we talked about the way they sort of are triggered and the reactions and blending of them, and how one can lead to another. And then the final bit they talked about was how we manage our emotions, and that sort of speaks for itself, but it's being able to control our own emotions and realizing the impact our emotions can have on other people. So just have a look at one more theory on the next slide. So another was Petridis and Furnham, later 2001, and this is a trait approach. So the trait models say that it is not necessarily an intelligence, not emotional intelligence. They say it's more about natural traits or facets that we all possess, and we've all got them at differing levels. They said there were 15 distinct components, and they're listed there in the table. If it's not an intelligence and it's about abilities we've got, then we need to develop the skills to use those abilities, and that's what we need to develop as part of the emotional intelligence. But some suggestions in some of the trait theories that it's more about a moral quality or a conscience that we have than a skill, and that some of us have got more of a conscience than others, and lots of people have these different approaches to it, but it's either the Goldman approach of the things that we need to be aware of in the key areas, or it's natural traits that we've got. Whichever it is, we need to develop them, and we'll look at some steps of how we can develop them as part of our as part of our self-awareness in the next thing, when we look at some steps that we can use to develop them. So we've got many approaches out there to emotional intelligence, and these theories are quite complex, based on a science, but practically it's about the simplistic ones that probably the Goldman one outlined. It's about having self-awareness, regulation of yourself, having social and motivation that you can use to uplift yourself and uplift others. There are many other theories out there around this that you can research and look into and see, compare or see which suits your situation best, or I suppose it's more about which ones that you find fit with your beliefs and your values best. But they normally fall into 3 categories. They're either trait-based, ability-based, or mixed. And when I say based, I mean that's what they're trying to say emotional intelligence is all around. And big traits are normally what they would class as generically determined characteristics, things you're born with, natural instincts. So they talk about self-perception and using your natural personality. The abilities are normally a talent or a skill that you've developed, so it's based around problem solving and thinking about the best solution for the situation you're in with the person you're in. And they say they're more about thinking than just going with natural instinct. So they're more about a process of breaking it down and deciding what would be good and what would be bad for that situation with that person, and how you're going to. And then finally, mixed, obviously stands for itself, is a mixture of the two, and probably where I would feel more comfortable in that, yes, there are some natural traits or natural instincts, but I think we need to build on those and strengthen them and adapt our skills and use them, because some of them we're good at and some of them we're not too good at. So You can have a look a little bit more, but that's a brief overview, but that's emotional intelligence, and you need to research those a little bit more, and we'll move on to looking what you need to do for your activity. Right then, so we're going to do an activity now. It's sort of focusing in on what we've talked about in emotional intelligence, but it's going to be very useful in a way of making notes for when you have to do your end of unit assignment, and emotional intelligence is included. So the first thing I want you to do is to watch the video, Emotional Intelligence, How Good Leaders Become Great. There's also an article in the resources, an online article, which contains a couple of videos as well. One of them being a repeat of the Goleman video, so if you need to watch that again just to refresh, otherwise you can skip that. And then there's an activity I want you to do, which is a table-based activity really, where I just want you to compare and think about different emotional intelligence models. So watch those videos. You can also do any other research you want to do as well, so I'm just steering you towards two things I want you to do, which is one is watch that video, and second read the article, because they give a different approach. But do any other research you want to do, look at any other stuff, and make notes on the different EI models and what you think about them and their pros and cons for using the workplace. So that's your activity. Complete those, upload those to the VLE, and then we'll move on to the next session.